Future Sense is a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia at bayfm.org. Hosted by Nick Jeans and well-known international futurist Steve McDonald, Future Sense provides a fresh, deep analysis of global trends and emergent technologies. How can we identify the layers of growth, personally, socially, and globally? What are the signs missed, the truths being denied? Science, history, politics, psychology, ancient civilizations, alien contact, the new psychedelic revolution, cryptocurrency and other disruptive and distributed technologies, and much more. This is Future Sense.
5G. Well, folks, as you all know, probably out there who are listening to this show, and if you don't, you're implicated in the world anyway. 5G is on track with many disruptions, which is probably a good thing as we look at, I guess, the precautionary principle. Is it being applied to this sort of technology? But around the world, the idea is that this network of fifth generation EMF carrier radiation will create a new world, and there will be something like 20,000 small satellites that 12,000 of them have been launched by SpaceX, you'd be familiar with, and the other by various other large companies. But 5G has not been tested, or has it? Where has it been tested? Has it definitely not been tested on humans because it hasn't been rolled out yet? And there are big concerns about EMF radiation and this new generation basically looking at the wavelength of this radiation, the smaller, shorter millimeter wavelength, and saying this is more dangerous. Let's just put it very simply right now. On my Friday show here, I had a couple of guests at the local 5G, anti-5G network, which was good. There are so many issues to look at that we can only just take a bit of a scope with this show, I guess, on the meaning of it, and not so much the good or bad of it, but the meaning of it and how we may best approach this particular issue on the planet, because it is clearly a very big issue. It is going to be very transformative. What do you reckon, Steve? Where are we going to start with this?
I think one of the problems with 5G is that it's very much still under development, and it's very complex technology. And my impression, having done a relatively short amount of research into the technology and how it's being rolled out, is that the early stages of rollout will be very much a part of the development process. And so we're not going to know exactly how it functions and its performance until they iron out the initial problems during rollout, and that also makes it difficult to know what the end result is actually going to be in terms of how it will operate.
Yes. One of the concerns, obviously, is the proximity of these very small but very prolific, very everywhere, ubiquitous stations, which will send or update the signal in your neighbourhood, and the satellites, which will do the same for outlying regions, for regional areas and so forth across the globe. The question is whether this form of radiation actually is as serious as some people claim. There's certainly been claims about the effects on wildlife, and I've seen some of those reports. Again, we're not going to deal with all those today, just going to point you to, again, do your research. Curiosity, doubt, good places to start from with this. What's true, what's not true? This is the question. And the question about this new technology is, are these waves, these electromagnetic frequencies more dangerous than other frequencies that we already use? And I guess that's one question that is interesting to me, because it would appear that maybe not, but other people will certainly claim that they are more serious. What do we think, Steve? What do you reckon about this?
I think we don't have the answers yet, Nick. And I think that's, if we could summarise this short section of 5G, is it really comes down to we don't know. What we do know a little bit about how the technology is going to work. We know that there are going to be more transmission towers. We're told that the power of the transmission emerging from these small towers is going to be lower than the power that comes out of a 4G tower. But I also see that being contradicted in some articles online as well. Certainly the scientific articles that I've looked at are saying that the transmission power is lower, and it doesn't need to be as strong because there are more towers and the towers are closer together. And the scientific papers I've looked at are telling us that there is a greater radiation hazard from your handset, your actual phone being held to your ear, than there is from those transmission towers.
Yeah, so phone radiation is interesting. The phone next to your head if you're using it next to your head, is transmitting at a maximum of about 200 milliwatts, which is 23 dBm for those who understand those terminologies. That is at least 10,000 times more than the signal received from a tower. These are obviously 4G towers at the moment, but nevertheless, 10,000 times if you put your phone next to your head, as opposed to the tower, there's one right next to BFM here, that we'd be receiving some EMF radiation from, as we do from the sun and from the cosmos, of course, various forms of radiation. But typical transmission power values of phones are a lot lower. The base station at the tower controls the power of the phone. It sets phone transmission power to a level so that all phone signals are received at approximately the same strength. And the point being, though, that the power of phone transmissions has gone down since the first generations of mobile communication. In GSM phones, were allowed to transmit up to 1 and even 2 watts. You may remember that 20 years ago, the typical heavy user was holding the phone against the head and making voice calls all the time. With today's smartphones, a typical user does hardly make a phone call anymore, and instead is holding the phone about a metre away from the face for screen interaction. Of course, if you hold it that far away, it significantly decreases the amount of EMF radiation you're getting into your head. And of course, it also depends on the thickness of your skull. This is also fairly good science. That if you're a small child under 5 years old, the thickness of your skull is actually about 0.5 millimetre. By 10 years old, it's 1 millimetre. As an adult, it's 2 millimetres. And according to some diagrams that we've seen in front of us, mobile phones manage to, obviously through that thinner skull of a younger child, if you hold that phone or you get radiation close to you, much more dangerous and much more likely to enter the brain. So that seems to be likely to be true.
And this could have evolutionary implications, because it means that people with thicker skulls might survive. I'm joking, folks.
Yes. Well, I mean, does it have, because I mentioned this off air earlier today when we were discussing what we were talking about today, does it have implications in terms of our, we've talked about, and this is a bit of a jump, folks, but we're in the last half hour here. We've talked about on this show the light body, the human light body, the body that is not physical, and these beginning of deeper understanding and experience, and people who are working on the activation of the light body. And I do wonder whether the EMF networks, as they are becoming more and more sophisticated and ubiquitous on the planet, either contradict that light body, or perhaps in some bizarre way may support the activation of that body. I mean, this is a complete extrapolation here, and it's my idea, no one else's, and it's probably bunk. But I do wonder if this is the technology that we are evolving on the planet, whether we like it or not, if we can do it from a different layer, and not the layer 5 that we've been talking about today from the modern era. If we can do it from a different place, perhaps there is a supportive way that this can be implemented somehow.
I think that's quite possibly bunk, Nick. But the truth is, I don't really know. I don't have the answer.
I'm sure it's bunk, and most people won't want to hear that. Because
what I would say though is that it seems interesting to, if you look at the development of our technology and consider it as training wheels for the development of innate capacities, right? And so, if we look at the evolutionary transition that's going on at the moment for humanity, from the modern scientific industrial human to the postmodern humanistic networked human, what's clear is that the hardware technology seems to be preempting the way of being that's going to emerge out of it, right? And if it wasn't for our connective technology at the moment, we wouldn't actually, I venture to say, we wouldn't be in this paradigm shift, because it's the complexity created by the connected technology that is driving us to change the way that we are. And as we move into a new way of being human, that way of being human is very much about connecting deeply human to human, not via technology, although technology plays a role. And it's like the technology design has preempted what's emerging in us innately. And I think if we look forward over the next couple of paradigm shifts, this move that we see now to try and immerse the entire world in this radiating technology could be seen as training wheels for the emergence of what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit priest, called the emergence of a global mind, the noosphere. Yeah, which in his reckoning and in my reckoning won't be artificial radiated stuff. It'll be stuff that happens through us, through our material being.
Well, of course, Terence McKenna used to say exactly this, which I can remember his exact quote, that technology was like an exoskeleton, so to speak, an externalization, as you're saying, of those innate capabilities that we're just beginning to rediscover. Things like telepathy, you could say, are an advanced form of that connectivity without the technology.
Yes.
And I think that's a really good way of looking at this. But we're a little way away from this, of course, and we do have to go through this process of the rollout of these kind of technologies, which are still coming from the old paradigm. So there has to be questions about that. And I think that's a sensible place to go, independent of health hazards, yes or no, which I think the jury is out on that. And I'm happy to receive anything about this. I'm certainly not someone who wants to have 5G, by the way, folks, but I think we're trying to determine what is actually real here for us, what's valuable and what is actually honest and sensible, and what is actually fake news about stuff. Because in that reaction to these paradigm shifts, a lot of people, of course, will, out of fear, will go to all lengths to try and prove that things are not good for us, and that's not necessarily the best and the most intelligent way to go about this.
No, a couple of things come to mind for me. The first thing is that the science of the radiation of electromagnetic waves is that the power of the transmission drops off fairly radically with distance. So you don't have to be too far away from an even strong transmitting tower to be in a relatively safe zone of transmission, according to the science that's existing at the moment. And it's something that, the mathematics of it in an unobstructed signal. It's something like the power drops away relative to the square of the distance.
Inverse proportion. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if the 4G, the current 4G system was really that bad, and I mean, you think about how many people are walking around spending much of their day with their phone to their ear, particularly in sort of high intensity jobs where they're buying and selling stuff and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. If it was really that bad, then we would all know a whole bunch of people who were having health problems from it. And I can't think of anybody that I know at the moment that has a head-based cancer, for example, from holding their phone.
Though I will point to a Daily Mail from the UK. It's a Daily Mail, but it's a Murdoch paper, no doubt. From last month, a cell phone tower has been shut down at an elementary school after 8 kids have been diagnosed with cancer in mysterious cluster. And the key points here, they're all under the age of 10. These kids, they each have different types of cancer: brain, kidney, liver and lymphoma. There's scant evidence that cell phone towers pose a real risk to humans. However, even skeptics say the number of cases in this cluster is unusual. Sprint, which owns the tower, has shut it down despite insisting the radio frequency levels are 100 times below the federal limit. And a private investigator for the patient's mums found the levels were higher than reported, which is, as we said before, whatever figures fit the story, then they can be found one way or the other.
Yeah, and it's encouraging to see that the tower operator actually shut it down, I think, in that case, which is, quite good, I think, without knowing having any scientific proof of whether it was causing the issue or not. They've shut it down, which is wonderful. And that's more, the kind of thing I'd like to see is that sort of preemptive, careful approach. And one of the downsides to the way that 5G is being rolled out is that, like most things in the scientific industrial era, it's being driven by this desire to make money. And the desire of the people who are rolling out the technology, their desire to make money is being aligned as best as possible with people's need for faster internet, the desire for faster internet to kind of justify it. But at the end of the day, what we need is a system that puts people first and safety first and health first. And so if there is any doubt and we can't prove that it's safe, then it really should be delayed until we can prove it's safe. I mean, that would be an ideal solution.
Yeah. I mean, there are major people involved in the encountering the unmitigated rollout of 5G, including a barrister named Raymond Broomhall, who's rather interesting. And it's important that these kind of people. He works with Michael Kirby's rooms down in Victoria, I gather. And although he's working here in Perth, I'm just looking at the article. How best to utilise Australia's government legal systems in the people's fight against the telecommunication industry and the 5G system. And what he's done is actually to do with health and safety. You've got that piece there, haven't you? I can't find that particular piece.
I've got it here. Yeah. This Barrister Ray Broomhall was involved in the fight against the Wilson's Creek Tower,
right,
in our local area here.
Yes. Hello, Steve Tonaguzzo, if you're listening out there.
And he was also involved in another legal case in Sydney around the Coogee-Randwick area where they were fighting TPG about the installation of 5G systems there. And basically what he's done is he's found a loophole in the legal system whereby if a claimant can obtain medical advice, written medical advice, that electromagnetic emissions may be harmful to their health. The problem it raises for the telco companies is that they are not health experts. They don't give medical advice. And if there is professional evidence in writing that, okay, this is a threat to someone's health, then if they go ahead and construct the tower, in legal terms, it can be defined as an assault on a person's safety.
Yes, right? Interesting.
Which obviously has huge legal implications. And as I understand it, this is how Ray has managed to win a couple of cases, including the Wilson's Creek case.
Yes.
He's got medical advice. So he's found a doctor that's prepared that has looked at the science and prepared to write and say, look, this is going to harm people's health. And then the telco companies have got no choice then but to back off, because otherwise they make themselves liable for what is legally classed as an assault.
Indeed. A couple of texts here relevant. People need to move away from thinking radiation as a bad word. All life on this planet is here due to radiation.
That's very true. And a simple example that I raised with Nick over coffee this morning is, if you go out on a hot summer's day in Australia and you sit in the sun unprotected for 8 hours, you're going to be badly damaged. Okay, so that straight away is going to be way more harmful than going and sitting next to a 4G tower. Just in terms of its immediate
5G tower,
or a 5G tower in terms of its immediate response. So it's good to keep those things in mind. And the threat posed by both solar radiation and cosmic radiation, in other words, cosmic rays coming from other stars in space, is actually bigger, I would suggest, than anything from our current phone networks, at least.
Second text here, 5G is sounding very similar to when the people that smoked tobacco in clubs and pubs, etc., had more rights than the non-smokers. It was simply forced onto non-smokers.
Yeah,
and fair analogy.
That's a classic outcome of the modern scientific industrial way. Is whoever's got the money drives the agenda. Basically, it's what it comes down to, and people who don't have money come second. It's as simple as that.
And on that note, actually, for those who are interested in this topic, and I know many of you are, a very interesting article I came across. It's quite deep, so I'm not going to go into it too much today. Comes from a website called Rhizomatica, which is RHIZOMATICA.org, and the general coordinator of that site is a guy called Peter Bloom, and he talks a lot about the financial, sets aside all the health concerns. In fact, doesn't even mention them, I don't think, in this article, but really looks at the technology. And he's an insider and claims, among other things, well, the thing that really struck me is this phrase. He says, what I was struck by, says he, when he was at the 2018 Mobile World conference called GSMA, which is to do with all of this mobile technology and EMF technology, he was struck and worried even by the change in discourse from connecting people to connecting things. And I thought that was very interesting, given we're talking about this moving into the connecting people era.
Yes.
That, on the other hand, the technology is still stuck back in that expression of the previous era of let's connect things up. Even though Facebook and social media always say, well, let's connect people, that's our purview, that's what we're going to do. Well, in the end, it's turned out to be a purely financial sort of marketing venture, really, you could argue.
Yeah, and what we're calling the previous era here is actually still the dominant paradigm globally. It's just that we're in transition, right? Yeah. So things are dominantly driven by individually oriented technology, which is by nature disconnecting. And even the internet and all of the social media, although it gives us access to people all over the world, ultimately it's disconnecting us from human to human contact.
Yeah.
And that's because it's come out of an era and a mindset that is all about disconnection, and going deeply in narrow spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. Now, from this piece from Peter Bloom, I'll just read a short part here. Everything being connected. The makers of these networking chips in this technology, 5G technology, and all the associated, as Steve said earlier, it's a very complex technology. There are many pieces to it. But the makers of these networking chips are companies like Qualcomm, Intel, Broadcom, and Samsung. These are huge companies, and they know how to throw their weight around. The point being, when they set their mind to it, they are able to spur industry-wide changes to benefit their bottom line. There was a ton of hype around 5G because it creates more business for the whole supply chain. But the apex predators remain the chipset manufacturers for now. And I think that's interesting, that we have to remember that that's to follow the money, that old equation.
Yeah, exactly. And the technology has many parts. I mean, you mentioned the smaller wavelength, and these millimeter length waves allow you to stack more data onto a transmission. So that's why they're using that. You've got the small cell arrangement where we've got smaller towers packed closer together. You've got what they call massive MIMO, which is multiple input, multiple output. And something called beam forming, which is concerning because I saw in one of the papers I read, I saw an image of these small towers in an urban environment, and the way that they're designed to be very, very smart, and sometimes they'll intentionally bounce signals off other buildings, in confined spaces in order to reach dead spots and those sorts of things.
Yep.
And this, obviously, from a technical point of view, is seen as an improvement because you get better coverage. You've got much faster downloads because of the millimeter wavelength and the more data it can carry. So I think, if I remember rightly, I saw in one of the things I read that it might take you 5 or 6 minutes on 4G to download a HD movie now, and it could take
1 second.
Exactly.
It can take 1 second, possibly.
Much faster. There's this thing called beam forming, which is potentially a concern, and that is that the technology will have the power to address signals and focus them very sort of intensively on an individual device. And so the antenna can reconfigure itself not in a hardware but in a software way, reconfigure itself to transmit in such a way that instead of creating a broad beam, it narrows the beam right down like a torchlight or a spotlight to direct signals in a very particular place. And as we know now, I mean, these days, almost everything has been weaponized. When you look at the superpowers and what goes on, and the stuff that goes on that doesn't fit the old definition of what war is. It's not soldiers digging holes and firing things at each other, but it's creating conflict in ways that are very subtle and hard to see sometimes. And we know for a fact that the 4G telephone network has been instrumental in modern warfare. The location signals which come out of a mobile phone have been used for drone targeting. Very, very clear about that.
Yes.
And we can be guaranteed that while the dominant paradigm is still the modern scientific industrial way of thinking, then whatever is available is going to be used to progress those sorts of agendas. And so I'm certain that the 5G technology will provide more detailed targeting advice for military style use, and also there are questions around exactly what it could be used for if they wanted to target a society, a group, or even just a single individual on the 5G network through transmitting something out that in a very focused way that could have a number of different impacts. I mean, it might not be about the direct impact of the electromagnetic transmission from the tower. It might be about what your phone does. For example, maybe they could take control of your phone and make it transmit a harmful frequency or a harmful sound and those sorts of things. I'm pretty confident that sort of technology exists already.
Well, I think so, and I think it also indicates that we are entering the era of frequency, vibration, and resonance, and in the beginning, again, it's going to be with the dominant paradigm still dominant, it's going to be utilised and misused in various ways potentially, and that's the danger. But I think the trend, the general direction we're moving on is a good one, and that is towards that vibration, frequency, resonance. These kind of concepts become, in a sense, understood as the core foundation of life itself, perhaps.
That's true. They say physics is the new medicine.
Physics is the new medicine.
Like that. It's very much about
quick
resonance.
Text here. If 5G frequencies are dangerous, why not infrared, which are of much higher frequency? And true, you can't have too much infrared or X-rays for that reason. All that is true, but in small doses, supposedly, these frequencies are okay or useful and healing at times.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems that because the technology itself is changing, it seems to be changing even up to the point when they're starting to roll it out. I think they're going to be tweaking and changing things, so it's very hard to do a scientific study on the impact of it, until it actually is rolled out.
Yeah.
You're tuned to Future Sense with Nick Jeans and Steve McDonald. Engage, emerge, activate, and spiral up.
Last few minutes of Future Sense. Here's 10:54 here with Steve and Nick, and as I said, Pregnancy, Birth and Beyond coming up very shortly here on Bay FM. Let's summarise a little bit about what we've just been talking about.
Yeah, I think at this point it's very difficult to discern what the threat is, and indeed, if there is a significant threat from 5G technology. Certainly we can see a number of areas where there is a potential threat, but there doesn't seem to have been any collection of detailed scientific studies, and that's made problematic by the fact that the technology itself has been shifting and changing in terms of how it will operate. And it looks to me like even up to the point where they're starting to roll it out, they're still going to be testing and changing things, in terms of how the technology works. We can say that we've identified what looks like a couple of cases here, legal cases here in Australia, where a successful block has been erected, a legal block to the construction of transmission towers in communities, including one in our local area here in the Byron Shire.
Wilson's Creek, yeah.
Yeah. So it's comforting to know that there is a legal loophole there, which if a community is concerned, that they can take advantage of. And this is really an ongoing conversation, and we'll be looking for results from areas where the technology is being rolled out early and we'll be reporting back to you and making this an ongoing conversation. Absolutely, and any information that you do have, please, you send to us. I get a lot of this myself. You can email me, actually. I'm quite happy for you to do that, nickjeans@gmail.com, with any information which we'll use. And as I said, you can always text when people are talking on shows about these kind of issues on our text line, 0437341119. It is a big thing. As I said a little while ago, personally, I'm not particularly enamoured by 5G, but I also feel that the resistance to it is quite young and adolescent at the moment. It's not really a criticism. It's just like it needs to mature to really find where the issues are and how to really address and to face this digital and electronic ecosystem that is being put in place on, over and around the planet. And that itself is a fascinating thing as we enter this very amazing period that we are. Well, we are in this amazing period of transformation right now. And somehow this is part of it. Good, bad or indifferent, we don't absolutely know. But do your own research. We like to encourage everybody here. Do your own research. Find out what works for you. Wade through all the information we talked about before. I personally find it very easy, or relatively easy these days, or easier to use really a sense of intuition when it comes to information that's out there, all sorts of stuff in front of me. What actually feels that you're drawn to, that doesn't just support your point of view? What is it that you can see some other angle that you may not have looked at before? Don't be closed to what doesn't agree with you. Have a good look. Yeah. Okay. Bye. Thanks. See you next week. Cheers.
You've been listening to Future Sense, a podcast edited from the radio show of the same name, broadcast on Bay FM in Byron Bay, Australia, at bayfm.org. Future Sense is available on iTunes and SoundCloud. The future is here now. It's just not evenly distributed.